Cool Borders! Here we go!
Hey, what's good people? I'm Jace the Ace and welcome to my gaming space. Today marks the first episode of my new series, it's all about Cool Birders 2. So as the name of this series suggests, each new video in this series will be dedicated to a specific topic or topics pertaining to this awesome snowboarding game. Now for those who don't know, Cool Birders 2 is a snowboarding game that came out in 1997 for the OG PlayStation. It was developed by Web Systems, who are sadly no longer around. Aww. And is the second installment of the Cool Birders series.
Well, duh.
The game itself offers many modes to choose from, has a lot of unique courses, some pretty interesting characters, and a good amount of unlockables to obtain. I personally think Cool Birders 2 has very high replayability because I've owned this game for many years and I still enjoy it whenever I have an itch to play it. The soundtrack, fast-paced gameplay, but most importantly competition mode, are the main reasons I find myself playing this game to this day. I guess you could say that I have a lot of passion for this game. So much passion that I want to make videos talking about it. Now if you aren't a fan of Cool Birders 2, leave. I kid. I have a pretty vast video game library, so I plan to upload a lot of unrelated Cool Birders 2 content in conjunction to this series. And I really look forward to it. As for what I'll be talking about in this video, since it's the very first video, I decided to keep things simple. So I'll be going over the starting characters and the character stats. Sort of like a review / tutorial of the sorts, while also throwing in some tips on how this game works. I'll dive deeper into the more juicy stuff in future videos. So let's get started.
And now, our feature presentation.
Let's start off by going over the 4 default characters. In this game you start off with 4 characters: Yagi the Trick Performer, Jin the Avalanche Writer, Cindy the Speed Queen, and Iron the Dangerous Curve Attacker. Each character has their own strengths and weaknesses. By the way, the titles I gave them come directly from the official Japanese guidebook. So they're official. Nerd! And proud of it. Anyways, let's start off by going over my probably most used character, Yagi. Here is his info, and here are his stats. Judging by his stats, this character is all about them tricks. In most modes, being able to pull off really cool tricks is a must, hence the title of this game, which in turn makes him a formidable choice in pretty much any mode. In competition mode, which is my favorite mode, his above average jump and technique will prove to be quite useful in obtaining high scores during the trick sessions. But what the heck is technique? Well, technique is a stat that determines how fast a character spins or flips. The higher a character's technique is, the faster they will rotate while executing said tricks. To pull off a rotation trick, press and hold down the X button while simultaneously holding down the direction you want to spin or flip on the D-pad. Along with the character's technique stat, the duration of how long you hold the buttons down will also affect how fast a character will rotate. Once you've reached the very edge of the jump, release the X button. Now moving back to Yagi, pulling off tricks may be his forte, but just keep in mind his max speed is quite poor, so you might have trouble breaking free from AI opponents if you're using a board with a low max speed stat. Also, his balance is a tad shaky, so I recommend practicing landing his tricks in big air mode before jumping into the real deal that is competition mode. Overall, his stats are still pretty well rounded and is a great pick for all levels of play. Alright, next up is Jin the Avalanche Writer. Here's his basic info. Now check out his stats. Judging by his stats, Jin the Avalanche Writer is only good for one thing: riding the avalanche. Well, that'd be nice, but there are no avalanches in Cool Breeders 2. Jin's title basically means he's all about speed and nothing else. His great power stat helps him resist intentional shoves from AI opponents while also giving you the option to intentionally shove them back with mild risk. Now honestly, I rarely do this, because 1, if you shove opponents too hard, Jin will also lose his balance, and 2, power is only applied if two characters collide from the left or right. If you run into them head on, you're almost guaranteed to wipe out regardless of power, so I just try to overtake AI and try to avoid confrontation altogether. Jin's maxed out max speed is something else though. For instance, all around boards have a moderate base speed stat, but if you pair Jin to one of these while utilizing his max speed, his overall top speed increases to base speeds of that of Alpine Boards, which are the fastest class of boards. To explain it in a different way, base speed is simply the highest speed a board will reach when you're not utilizing a character's max speed. The type of board as well as terrain both impact your base speed. All-around Type 1 boards, for example, have a base speed of 71 miles per hour on regular snow. But when Jin utilizes his max speed, the top speed increases from 71 miles per hour to 81 miles per hour. .81 miles per hour is the base speed of Alpine Type 1 boards, so Jin's base speed increases by 3 board types when his max speed is included. With speed this good, you could start erasing the back of the pack, on an all-around board mind you, and still finish at the top just by utilizing his max speed. And if you pair him with an Alpine board, it goes without saying that his overall top speed becomes insane. Now his overall trick game is pretty bad. While I don't have to explain why Jin having a below average jump is detrimental to his trick game, His below average technique means the speed of his rotations is noticeably slower compared to other characters. And his almost non-existent balance means the window of error he has into sticking his landings is pretty small. This can be somewhat remedied by pairing him with a board with higher stability, but I still wouldn't recommend attempting to break any trick records with this guy. Then there's his back quickness stat, which for me is the most annoying aspect of this character. The quickness stat determines how fast a character can maneuver from left to right in quick succession. In other words, the less quickness a character has, the more lag and cooldown they will have between their movements. This can make Gym pretty tricky to use on courses that require a lot of rapid changes in movements, so you'll have to be on point with your turns or else you'll find yourself crashing pretty often. So overall, Jin is a character of extremes who's best suited for advanced players who prefer to give themselves a challenge, such as myself. But in all seriousness, he's definitely usable, he just requires a bit more time and effort to get the hang of. Up next, we have Cindy the Speed Queen. Here's her info, and here are her stats. Judging by her stats and title, Cindy's a speed type with good flexibility. Cindy's a speed type with good flexibility. The reason I say this is because for a speed type character, her overall stat spread is pretty good. Having decent technique and quickness means she's capable of pulling off impressive tricks and is fairly easy to control. Tack on a good max speed stat and that's icing on the cake. I personally play her when I play competition mode on hard difficulty since her positive attributes really shine there. Pulling off really cool tricks as well as being able to leave opponents in the dust is a real awesome combination. I think she's best suited for intermediate and advanced players, because her poor balance and below average jump can sometimes be problematic in certain modes. But once you learn how to deal with her shortcomings, Cindy becomes a quite fun character to play as. Now let's move on to the last default character, Iron. Here's her info. And next, you guessed it, her stats. After seeing her stats, it's clear that Iron is all about safety and control. On a freestyle board, her excellent balance is on full display, as she is almost guaranteed to land her spins no matter how far off the mark you are. And what I mean by off the mark is that normally when you land at this particular angle, your character will wipe out because this is the absolute worst angle to land at. But with Iron's max balance stat, she has more room for error upon landing, and thus can usually land at this angle without wiping out. Now, if you still aren't familiar with the characteristics of each type of board, I'll gladly explain them very briefly. Freestyle boards have high stability and response, but have a low top speed. So while they're not the best class of boards to race with due to being so slow, they do have excellent control and are the best class of boards to pull off tricks with, since you get a lot more room for error with your landings. All-around boards are pretty balanced in terms of max speed, response, and stability. So while this class of boards doesn't excel in any particular stat, this makes them arguably pretty versatile, since they have enough speed and control for races, and an acceptable amount of balance for pulling off tricks. Alpine Boards have high max speed, but low response and stability. This means you'll have to have a good grip of the game in order to handle them, as these boards are quite tricky to maneuver, and successfully landing tricks with them will take practice, and a little bit of luck, because Alpine Boards require a lot more precision with landings. But the reward for mastering these speedy boards makes it worth it. Now that you got the gist of the boards and its classes, you can see why a character like Iron, who specializes in safety, is a force to be reckoned with on a freestyle board, as her stability and overall board control becomes unmatched. Moving on to Iron's other perfect stat, her maxed out quickness means she's noticeably easier to control compared to other characters. She has a much easier time tackling all the sharp curves this game has to offer, hence why she has the awesome title of the Dangerous Curve Attacker.
So, that just happened.
Let's continue where Max left off with sharp turns, while he calms himself. Sharp turns are essential to mastering this fast-paced game. To execute a sharp turn, you simply tap or press the square button.
Huh.
Now Iron's power and max speed stat leaves a lot to be desired. With her being so frail, I would avoid getting into shoving matches with AI opponents. And just like with Yagi, Iron has low max speed issues due to her, well, low max speed. Her overall top speed only increases by one board type when her max speed is in use, so it may be best to switch to a faster board to accommodate her low max speed during races, so that the AI opponents don't catch up to you so easily during the speed sessions. Just keep in mind the more max speed your board has, the more balance you'll be sacrificing from her. But this applies to all characters really. She'll still have decent balance on all-around boards, but unlike when she's paired to a freestyle board, she'll no longer receive a free pass if you completely miss the mark. Oh, and for those who are curious, this is what a perfect landing looks like. The closer your character lands at this angle, the less likely you'll wipe out. Just thought I'd tell you that since we're on the topic of balance. Anyways, Iron is best suited for beginners as she is the best character in my opinion to practice carving tough corners and landing tricks. So which default character do I think is best? Well, I made a tier list to answer that very question, because everyone loves a good tier list.
Stop it. Get some help.
Anyways, take a gander at this. Now just to let you know, every mode played a factor into what tier I decide to place a character in. Since I haven't really dug into the specifics of each mode in this video, I'll try to keep my explanations on each character placement short but informative. Oh, and keep in mind, this tier list is 100% my opinion. As you can see in A tier, I consider Yagi to be the best default character as his overall stat spread makes him a viable choice in most modes. And in competition mode specifically, I find him to be the most reliable and consistent out of the four. This is thanks to his excellent technique and above average jump stat. Moving on to Irene, placing her in A tier was kind of a tough choice due to her slightly weaker jump and technique. But on the other hand, when you consider half pipe and free ride mode, where timing your perfect landings become trickier, her maxed out balance makes her an extremely reliable character and arguably A tier material. If it wasn't for her perfect balance stat, I definitely would have put Irene in B tier. Speaking of B tier, let's move down to Cindy. Just as before, I had a hard time deciding if this character should go in A tier or B tier, but in the end, I decided to put her in B tier, because her low balance stat and below average jump slightly hinders her usefulness outside of competition mode. To briefly put it, some other modes are all about obtaining your lowest time, your best personal trick score, or a combination of the two. So aside from warming up for competition mode, there's really no point for me to use her if I'm trying to break any records when I could use characters who excel more in terms of safety, max speed, and trick performance. Still, her usefulness in competition mode cannot be ignored, so I don't see her anything worse than B tier. In fact, if I was only taking competition mode into account for Cindy's tier placement, not only would I put her in A tier, but I would put her in front of Irene, because her max speed stat makes her slightly more solid in this mode. Now for C tier, placing Jin here was an easy choice as he is quite linear compared to the rest of the default characters. All he has going for him is his power and max speed. And as I said in his character overview, purposely trying to shove AI is risky in general, high power or not. So this dude really only has one useful stat, which is his max speed. This pretty much makes him only viable in free ride mode when trying to obtain low times, and competition mode with the exception of hard difficulty. So Jin has his perks, and isn't completely useless, cause if he were, I would have put him in D tier.
Flashback. End of flashback.
Blues, I'm so excited.
Whatever. That just happened.
So those are my reasonings for each character's tier placement. Now this list is still incomplete because there's still more characters to be added to it, but we'll save that discussion for another time. Yeah, I'm sure some might find it weird that I'm making a tier list for a snowboarding game, especially one as old as this. But what can I say? I'm a weird guy. And I'm doing it just for the fun of it. Aww. Now before we wrap things up, there's one more piece of info I want to share. Drum rolls, Max. Now I'm sure you're familiar with the 6 stats each character has, but did you know that there's possibly a hidden 7th stat? Yep, it's the Accelerate stat. It's listed right here in the guidebook. Pretty neat, am I right? Now since each character has a different Accelerate stat, I decided to test out how fast each character reaches top speed. I paired each character to the same type of board and watched each character's speedometer very carefully. Unfortunately, after testing a few scenarios where a character loses speed and has to build it back up, I didn't notice any difference in the rate each character reached top speed. Maybe it's just an attribute that was dropped sometime during development that they just forgot to omit from the guidebook. I guess I have to run more tests on this stat in the future, if I wish to form a more confident answer. Obviously, he's about to go spread the message on this great find. Whew. And that's a wrap. So do you agree or disagree with my tier list? What are your thoughts on my character analysis? Is there anything I need to improve on in terms of video quality? Any type of feedback is appreciated. But above all, I appreciate you taking the time to watch my vid. Expect more videos pertaining to this game in the future, cause this game seriously needs more exposure. Well, that's all there is from us. Stay safe out there guys, and we'll see you in the next video.
That just happened.